Ethan Brooks and Marcus Hill would never forget that blizzard night in Red Pine, Wyoming. The night they and their partner Ryan Carter were drugged, bound, and left to die inside an abandoned house set ablaze. Ethan's lungs burned as he struggled to pry his eyes open through the suffocating smoke, and through the haze he saw a gray shape leap through the fire. It was Shadow, the German shepherd they had once thought dead for 2 long years. The dog ripped through their ropes, dragged each man toward safety, and used his own body to shield them from the flames. Ryan never woke, and by the time they reached the hospital, he was gone. From that night forward, Ethan and Marcus swore to hunt down whoever had tried to silence them, and Shadow became their living proof that miracles walk this earth. Snow fell in heavy sheets over the quiet mountain town of Red Pine, the kind of night where even the wind felt frozen in its tracks. The main street was deserted, neon signs flickering over shuttered diners, the groan of ice-burdened pine trees echoing in the distance. 2 miles out, along a rutted dirt road swallowed by drifts, stood an abandoned cabin the locals called the Mill House. Tonight its windows glowed not with warmth but with an angry orange light, fire licking at the night. Up on the ridge a lone figure moved, Shadow, a 7-year-old German shepherd with thick sable and black fur crusted with frost. Once he had worked with the state police, until he vanished after an ambush 2 winters ago. Rumors said he'd died under the rubble. Some claimed he'd gone wild. But he had survived, clinging to fragments of training, to the instinct that tied him to the men he once served. Tonight the scent on the wind was not prey, but gasoline and fear. Inside the cabin, Ethan stirred on the scorched wooden floor. At 38, he carried the quiet strength of a veteran detective. 15 years on the force and an old injury in his left knee that still ached when the weather turned. His wrists were tied behind him with coarse rope, the cuffs of his navy winter jacket singed black. Smoke clawed at his lungs. Beside him lay Marcus Hill, 33, a former Marine turned deputy with the restlessness of someone who had seen too much combat and not enough peace. His short brown hair clung to his head under a sweat-stained patrol cap. His breath shallow and quick as his eyes flicked toward the doorway where flames crawled across the ceiling beams. He tried to free his arms, but the rope only bit into his skin. Ryan Carter, the youngest at 29, had barely begun his career with the Red Pine PD. A boyish face, sandy hair plastered to his forehead, and a reputation for volunteering for holiday shifts and carrying dog treats in his cruiser, just in case. Now he lay sprawled on his back, unmoving, lips blue from smoke and cold. The cabin around them was no shelter but a trap, its doors padlocked from the outside, windows nailed shut, gasoline soaking the floor. Ethan coughed hard, vision swimming. "Marcus," he rasped. "Check Ryan." Marcus scooted closer, boots scraping, then hissed through clenched teeth. "He's out cold. Pulse is weak." The fire cracked like gunfire as the ceiling groaned above them. Smoke pressed low, thick and poisonous. Up on the ridge, Shadow stiffened. He knew that smell. He knew that sound. He tore down the slope, snow spraying under his paws. At the porch, he sniffed once at the door, lowered his shoulder and rammed it. The frame shuddered. Again, and again. On the third strike, the padlock twisted, hinges splitting, hot air blasting outward. Shadow plunged inside. Through the smoke, Ethan saw the shape emerge. Broad shoulders, ears pricked forward, moving low and fast. "What the?" he rasped. Marcus's eyes went wide. "That's a dog." Shadow padded to Ryan first, sniffed his cheek, then turned to the others. He nosed the ropes and bit down, teeth snapping fiber. Ethan's wrists burned as the ropes frayed, but he was free. He stumbled to his knees, coughing. "Marcus next," he croaked. Shadow circled and shredded Marcus's bindings. Marcus yanked his arms loose and crawled straight to Ryan, hauling him up. "Help me!" he barked, and together they dragged Ryan toward the door. The fire roared like a living thing, eating its way across the walls. Shadow darted ahead, pawing snow clear of the porch. An ember singed the fur on his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. He barked once, sharp and commanding. The 3 men stumbled out into the snow, Ryan's head lolling between them. Cold air cut their throats like glass, but it was clean. Behind them, the cabin's roof collapsed with a roar, sparks spiraling into the storm like stars falling in reverse. Marcus pressed 2 fingers to Ryan's neck. "Still a pulse," he said, voice rough. Ethan dropped his jacket over Ryan's chest. "Stay with us," he hissed. At the tree line stood a woman in a red parka, mid-30s, black hair tucked under a fur-lined hood, phone in her gloved hands. Her breath puffed white as she whispered, "Oh my God," hardly believing what she was filming. She had come out to spot wildlife but found herself recording a rescue no one would believe without proof. Shadow limped back toward the men, ears swiveling, breath steaming. His gaze flicked to the woman, then to the dark road beyond, as though he could sense eyes watching. Marcus looked at Ethan, then at the dog. "This wasn't random," he rasped. "Someone wanted us dead." Ethan didn't answer, just pressed a hand to Ryan's cheek and stared at Shadow, some half-forgotten memory tugging at him from the old training days. Snow came harder now, sticking to scorched coats and burnt timbers. The woman lowered her phone and fumbled to call for help. Sirens began to wail in the distance. Shadow sat beside the men, panting, trembling with exhaustion but unblinking. When the first fire truck lights split through the pines, Ethan exhaled like he hadn't since the fire started. Marcus wiped soot from his face with a torn sleeve. Shadow leaned against Ethan's leg just enough for warmth. The blizzard swallowed the sound again, and for a long moment only the snow moved. Then came the roar of engines and a wash of red and blue. Firefighters doused the last of the flames. EMTs guided Ethan and Marcus onto gurneys. Oxygen masks pressed over smoke-stained faces. Ryan was lifted between them, pale and motionless but still alive. Shadow stayed close, his scorched fur smelling of smoke, eyes tracking every stranger with the quiet vigilance of a soldier. The ambulance ride blurred into a tunnel of white, Ethan clutching Ryan's limp hand and whispering words he wouldn't even remember later. Marcus sat hunched under a blanket, discipline cracked by the tremor in his hands. The snow outside thickened until the world looked erased. At Red Pine Community Hospital, the ER doors burst open and the trauma team swarmed. Dr. Celia Grant, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, led the charge, barking orders as though she'd been preparing for this moment all her life. "Get the young one to ICU. Push O2. U2 vitals and decantam. Check for carbon monoxide saturation." Ethan and Marcus had been separated from Ryan, each of them pulled into the chaos of the hospital's emergency wing. A nurse gently wiped the soot from Marcus' forehead, shining a small flashlight into his pupils. Another nurse rolled up Ethan's sleeve, drew blood, and clipped a pulse oximeter to his finger. The numbers glowed low, but not dangerously. Both men were placed on oxygen, for lines delivering fluids as their bodies slowly came down from the fire's shock. Down the hallway, glass panels revealed the ICU room where Ryan lay still under a respirator mask, tubes snaking from his arms, machines hissing and beeping in steady rhythm. Dr. Grant's team moved with quiet urgency around his bed, but the pallor of his skin stayed a stubborn gray. Ethan pressed a hand to the glass, his breath fogging the surface. Marcus stood behind him, his fists clenching and loosening, a silent rhythm of helplessness. Minutes crawled by before Dr. Grant stepped out. Her face was calm but grave, her voice measured as she said, "He inhaled too much cyanide from the accelerant. His lungs are failing. We're doing everything we can." In the waiting area, a different kind of patient was being cared for. Shadow had been guided in by careful hands. Dr. Anthony Ruiz, the town's only full-time veterinarian, had been woken from bed and called to the hospital. He was tall and lean, in his early 40s, with the weathered face of someone who had spent a lifetime in the mountains pulling lives, both human and animal, back from the edge. He still wore a headlamp clipped to his cap, a Carhartt jacket over his scrubs. "Easy, boy," Anthony murmured, running practiced hands over Shadow's scorched fur. "Let's get you fixed up." In a converted storage room turned into a small veterinary wing, Anthony disinfected the burn on Shadow's shoulder, wrapped it in a silver-coated bandage, then checked his paws, his ears, his heart rate. "This one's trained," he said quietly to the tech helping him. Moves like he's done this before. When Anthony passed a wand over Shadow's neck, a soft beep sounded. His brow lifted as a number appeared on the monitor. Well, I'll be damned. Marcus, pacing outside the door, stepped in when Anthony waved him closer. You recognize this code? The vet asked. Marcus leaned in, reading the screen. That's a State K9 chip, he said, his voice catching. Shadow, this dog went missing 2 winters ago in a raid downstate. They said he was dead. Anthony gave a low whistle. Looks like he found his way back. Shadow's ears flicked at the sound of Marcus' voice. The dog turned his head, meeting Marcus' gaze with steady, intelligent eyes. Marcus crouched, his hands trembling as they reached for the bandaged shoulder. You saved us, he whispered hoarsely. You saved us, and we didn't even know who you were. Across the hall, Ethan sat slumped in a hard plastic chair, staring at a crack in the linoleum floor. He hadn't cried since the day his marriage ended, but now his chest ached with a pressure that felt close to breaking. No tears came, just a hollow burn in his throat. The soft beep of the chip reader carried to him, and something in his memory stirred. A training seminar in Cheyenne 5 years ago. A young German shepherd showing off flawless search and rescue drills. A handler calling him Shadow. Ethan remembered shaking that handler's hand and patting the dog's head, never imagining they would meet again like this. A murmur at the entrance to the ICU hall drew Ethan's eyes. A woman stood there clutching a small bag to her chest. Marion Carter, Ryan's mother. She looked worn thin, in her late 50s, her parka hanging open despite the cold. Her eyes were dry but rimmed in red, the kind of dryness that comes only after hours of sobbing. Ethan pushed himself unsteadily to his feet. Mrs. Carter. She brushed past him without answering, pressing her palm against the glass window of the ICU. Her hand trembled as she looked at her son's motionless body, the tubes, the mask. Finally, she turned back to Ethan, her voice low but steady. He always said you'd watch out for him, that you were like his big brother on the force. Ethan swallowed, his throat tight. We tried, he said. Marion reached into her bag and pulled out a silver ring on a thin chain. This was my husband's, she said softly. Ryan wore it for luck. He told me once, if anything ever happened, to give it to you. She placed it in Ethan's palm and closed his fingers around it. Don't let them bury the truth. I won't, Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. Hours bled together like cracks spreading over thin ice. Nurses came and went. The beeping of Ryan's monitors faltered, then found a rhythm again, then faltered once more. Marcus stood with his hands braced against the window frame, head bowed. Shadow lay on the tile floor beside him, one paw bandaged, eyes half closed but always turned toward the ICU door, a silent guard. Just after dawn, Dr. Grant emerged. The look on her face said it all before her words followed. I'm so sorry. She's gone. The words left Dr. Grant's lips like a stone dropped into water, rippling through the sterile hall. Marion's legs buckled, and Ethan caught her before she hit the floor, guiding her gently into a chair. Marcus didn't move, his knuckles white where they gripped the window frame, as though letting go would shatter everything. In the small veterinary wing, Anthony came back carrying paperwork and a shallow dish of water. Shadow sniffed at it but didn't drink. Marcus knelt beside him, his voice breaking as he whispered, He's gone, boy. We lost him. Shadow's ears tilted forward, then slowly lowered, as if the dog somehow understood. Later, the hospital cafeteria sat nearly empty, its lights buzzing faintly overhead. Ethan and Marcus sat across from each other at a steel table, coffee cooling untouched between them. Outside, snowplows groaned along Main Street, pushing aside the remains of the night's storm. Ethan's fist was wrapped tight around the silver ring Marion had given him, its metal warm from the heat of his palm. Marcus stared down at a printed report with Shadow's K9 registry number highlighted at the top. Silence stretched between them, heavy as the mountains beyond town. His paw scraped against the dirt, scattering gray flakes. Marcus crouched down beside him. You got something? Shadow pawed again, then carefully gripped a charred plank between his teeth and dragged it aside. Beneath the debris was a warped metal box, half buried in melted snow. Ethan knelt and pulled it free, brushing soot from its surface. It was an external hard drive, scorched but still readable. His eyes met Marcus's, a silent understanding passing between them. "This didn't burn by accident," Ethan said quietly. While Ethan sealed the hard drive in an evidence bag, Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then turned it to Ethan. A video thumbnail glowed back at them. Shadow, lunging into the burning cabin, dragging them both out. "She filmed this," Marcus muttered. "The woman from the tree line." Across town, Sarah Holt sat in a booth at the Alpine Diner, her laptop open. She was 36, a wildlife photographer from Bozeman, her dark braid hanging over one shoulder, a worn red parka slung across the seat beside her. The video she had uploaded just 3 hours earlier was already exploding online. Tens of thousands of views, comments rolling in one after another. Asterisk hero dog cover-up? What's happening in Red Pines? Asterisk. Sarah chewed her lip, sipping her cold coffee as she debated whether to call the sheriff's office directly. Back at the cabin site, Sheriff Paul McAdams appeared from between the trees. He was in his early 50s, a man who had spent his life in Red Pines keeping its peace. His heavy canvas coat was dusted with frost, salt and pepper hair tucked under his cap. His voice was rough when he spoke. "You two weren't supposed to be here." Ethan held up the evidence bag. "We found something." Paul's eyes narrowed. "I'll take it back to the office." Marcus stepped forward, voice steady but sharper than before. "With respect, Sheriff, Ryan's dead. This is our case. We'll log everything properly, but we're not stepping away." Paul's breath fogged in the air. "Fine, but if the feds catch wind of this, it's out of my hands. You understand?" Ethan nodded once. Shadow barked suddenly, a single sharp sound, then pawed at another patch of snow near the base of a collapsed wall. Underneath was a melted plastic badge clip with a faint, scorched fingerprint still pressed into it. Ethan bagged it, his jaw tight. "Somebody wasn't as careful as they thought," he muttered. Meanwhile, Sarah's video kept spreading, picked up by local bloggers and then state news wires. Headlines appeared: "Hero Dog saves 2 deputies from arson trap." Anonymous comments accused Red Pines PD of a cover-up. Hashtags like #JusticeForRyan and #ShadowTheHero started trending. Inside the sheriff's office, Paul faced a line of reporters from Casper and Cheyenne, all shouting questions he couldn't yet answer. The pressure was building hour by hour. At the cabin, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text. Asterisk press outside. Big crowd. Asterisk he ignored it. Marcus crouched near the debris, snapping photos of faint boot tracks leading into the pines. "Tactical boots," he muttered. "Not hunters. Whoever this was parked down by the creek." Ethan nodded. "If the snow holds, we'll cast them." Wind picked up, scattering ash into the snow. Shadow's head lifted, ears pivoting toward some distant sound down the slope. Marcus followed his gaze but saw only white. By late afternoon, snow began to fall again, light as sifted flour. The two men packed their evidence, loaded Shadow into the back of the patrol SUV, and prepared to follow the next thread in a case that had just become very personal. Ethan started the engine, staring through the windshield at the blackened cabin one last time before putting the truck into gear. Marcus adjusted the rearview mirror and caught Shadow's eyes reflected back at him. The German Shepherd sat alert, his bandaged shoulder rising and falling steadily, as if he too understood that this wasn't over. Somewhere in town, Sarah Hull refreshed her phone and froze when a message request popped up from an unknown account. Asterisk, we know what you saw. Delete the video. Asterisk, she swallowed hard, her heart thudding, and glanced nervously around the diner. Ethan kept driving toward Red Pine, the evidence bag balanced on his lap, his jaw set. If what's on that drive matches what I think it does, he started. Marcus finished for him grimly. Then Ryan didn't die over a bad tip. Shadow let out a low rumble from the back seat, a sound that filled the car with a promise of what was to come. Snow whipped across red pine as dusk fell, turning the streets into narrow corridors of gray and white. Inside the sheriff's office, Ethan Brooks and Marcus Hill sat across from each other at the scarred oak table, the scorched external hard drive lying between them in its padded evidence bag. The state had sent them a forensic laptop, and its screen glowed in the dim room as a progress bar crept forward. The hum of the space heater was the only sound. Ethan, still in a clean but ash-smudged navy uniform shirt, leaned closer, storm-gray eyes locked on the loading files. Marcus had switched to a dark flannel and field jacket, his jeans tucked into his boots, trying to shake the feeling that he was still on duty, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. Shadow lay at their feet, tactical vest over his bandaged shoulder, head on his paws, watching everything. Across from them, Dana Kessler, the FBI's digital forensic expert flown in from Denver just hours ago, worked calmly. Tall and spare, her dark braid hung over her shoulder, and her laptop was plastered with stickers. Mountains, binary code, a paw print, clues to a quiet life beyond the job. Slowly, the hard drive's contents began to populate. Folders in cryptic codes, video files, logs. Dana clicked one open. Grainy footage revealed a warehouse with cages along the walls and figures moving between them. Another clip showed duffels being loaded into a private plane, coordinates scrolling at the bottom of the screen. Dana exhaled sharply. "This is trafficking," she said. "And drugs." Marcus's hands curled into fists. Ethan's jaw tightened. "We need names." Dana opened a text file labeled contacts. A list of numbers, initials, and bank transfers filled the screen, and one full name. Victor Crane. "You know him?" Dana asked. Ethan nodded once. Ex-state trooper, turned private security. Disappeared after charges were dropped 2 years ago. Marcus muttered, "Perfect predator. Knows the system." Shadow raised his head at the tension in their voices. Ethan ran his hand down the dog's neck, grounding himself. "We turn this over to the Bureau now," he said. Dana nodded. "I'll take custody of the drive. But you two are witnesses now. You're not going anywhere without protection until this is locked down." That night, the station's small gym doubled as a K-9 training space. Marcus worked with Shadow under the flickering lights, the dog obeying hand signals as though no time had passed since his service days. He tracked scent bags, sat patiently, then lunged with precision at the bite sleeve on Marcus's arm. Ethan leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "Still got it," he said quietly. Marcus grinned faintly, breathless, pulling off the sleeve. "So do I. Maybe." He scratched behind Shadow's ears. "You're saving my sanity, you know that?" The German shepherd pressed his head into Marcus's shoulder in reply. Later, Dana set up a secure call with Special Agent Robert Ellison, a seasoned FBI investigator running organized crime operations in the region. On the screen, Ellison's weathered face was framed by a wall map of Wyoming counties. "We've been chasing Crane's network for 2 years," he said. "If this holds up, it's the break we've been waiting for." Ethan leaned toward the camera. "They tried to kill us. They killed our partner. We want in." Ellison studied them for a long moment before nodding. "Officially, you're protected. Unofficially, we do this by the book. No cowboy moves." Marcus glanced down at Shadow. "And him." Ellison's mouth curved into a faint smile. "If he clears medical, he's part of the team." In the days that followed, Marcus built a new rhythm with Shadow. Early morning drills in the snow, scent lineups, quiet time in an empty cell block. Where nightmares once tore him awake, now Shadow nudged him at dawn, grounding him back in reality. Ethan spent long nights pinning stills from the hard drive to a map on the wall. Warehouses, airstrips, safe houses, each location forming a crooked triangle with red pine at its center. The scope of it all was staggering. One afternoon, a young deputy, Noah Green, came in with a folder of background checks. "Good work," Ethan said, scanning them. "Offshore accounts, shell companies, a private hangar near the Canadian border." Noah hesitated. "That dog's all over the news. My little sister has a poster of him. Calls him Captain Shadow." Marcus chuckled softly. He's more disciplined than half our force. Outside, protesters gathered, demanding justice for Ryan Carter. Inside, Marcus quietly cleaned Shadow's harness and clipped on a temporary bureau badge. "You're official now," he murmured. That night, Ethan found Marcus sitting alone on the gym floor, Shadow's head in his lap. "I used to think Iraq was the worst thing I'd ever see," Marcus said. "But this is worse. Because it's home." Ethan sat beside him. "You're still here. He's still here. That matters." Shadow pressed his paw against Marcus's knee, steadying him. Winter wrapped Red Pine in silence as Marcus returned to his apartment. The faint smell of coffee and oiled leather lingered in the small space. Shadow lifted his head, ears swiveling toward the hallway. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The same gray sedan had been parked near the station all week. His phone buzzed with anonymous calls that never spoke. Tonight, the sense of being hunted was sharp enough to taste. Across town, Ethan sat under the harsh fluorescent lights of the sheriff's office, Marion Carter's voice in his ear. "I found something in Ryan's Bible," she said. "Numbers. Calls he hid." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Send them," he said. "We'll bring them down. I swear." Back at Marcus's apartment, Shadow went rigid, nostrils flaring, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Marcus set down his mug, scanning the door. "What is it, boy?" Shadow's hackles rose. Outside, Clint Raleigh pressed himself flat against the hallway wall, a silenced pistol in his hand. A former mercenary, hired by Crane's network, he had a simple order: remove the deputy who wouldn't back down. Inside, Shadow exploded forward, barking, a deep, primal sound that shook the walls. Marcus dove for his sidearm just as a bullet tore through the doorframe, splintering wood. He rolled behind the couch, returned fire with 2 precise shots. Outside, Clint swore under his breath and retreated down the hallway, boots crunching on the thin layer of snow tracked inside. Upstairs, a neighbor cracked her door open, peering into the chaos. Ethan started the engine, staring at the burned cabin one last time through the windshield, the smoke-stained memory burning itself into his mind. Marcus adjusted the rearview mirror, catching Shadow's steady amber gaze in the reflection. The German shepherd sat alert, bandaged shoulder rising and falling with calm focus. Somewhere in town, Sarah Hole refreshed her phone and froze when she saw a message request from an unknown account. *, we know what you saw. Delete the video. *, her pulse quickened as she glanced around the diner, suddenly hyper-aware of every stranger's face. Ethan steered them back toward Red Pine, the evidence bag resting on his lap. "If what's on that drive matches what I think it does," he began, only for Marcus to finish the thought. "Then Ryan died for more than just a bad tip." Shadow's low rumble filled the car like a warning and a promise. Snow blew sideways across Red Pine as dusk descended, turning its streets into gray, narrow corridors. Inside the sheriff's office conference room, Ethan and Marcus sat across from each other at a scarred oak table. Between them lay the scorched hard drive inside a padded evidence bag, now wired to a forensic laptop provided by the state. The space heater hummed as a progress bar crept across the screen. Ethan leaned forward in his still ash-stained navy uniform shirt, storm gray eyes locked on the data. Marcus had changed into a dark flannel shirt under a field jacket, but the tension in his jaw betrayed how little he'd managed to leave the job behind. Shadow lay at their feet, his tactical vest covering his wound. Across the table, Dana Kessler, a seasoned FBI digital forensics expert flown in from Denver, watched the screen with quiet focus. Her laptop stickers, mountains, binary code, a paw print, hinted at a life beyond cases like this. Files began to populate. Folder names in code. Video. Logs. Dana opened one at random. The screen flickered to grainy warehouse footage. Cages against a wall, shadows of people moving between them. Another clip showed duffels being loaded onto a private plane, coordinates scrolling along the bottom. "This is trafficking," Dana said sharply. "And drugs." Marcus turned away, fists tightening, while Ethan's jaw flexed. "We need names." Dana opened a text file marked contacts. Among the coded numbers and transfers, one name was in full: Victor Crane. Ethan's expression hardened. Ex-state trooper. Turned security consultant. Went dark after charges got dropped 2 years ago. Marcus muttered under his breath. Perfect predator. Knows the system. Shadow's ears tilted at the sound of Marcus' voice, as though sharing his tension. Ethan ran a steady hand over the dog's neck. We turn this over to the bureau now.
Donna nodded.
But you two are now key witnesses. You're not going anywhere without protection. That night, Marcus worked with Shadow in the station's small gym under buzzing lights. Shadow obeyed every command flawlessly. Sit, stay, track. Then bit down on the padded sleeve with perfect precision before releasing at Marcus' word. Ethan leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. He's still got it. Marcus, breathing hard but smiling faintly, scratched behind the dog's ears. So do I. Maybe. Shadow pressed his head into Marcus' shoulder like he understood. Later, Dana patched through a secure video call with Special Agent Robert Ellison, the FBI's lead on organized crime for the region. His weathered face filled the screen, map of Wyoming counties behind him. We've been after Crane for 2 years. If this holds, it's our break. Ethan leaned closer. We're not just witnesses. They tried to kill us. They killed our partner. We want in. Ellison's steel-gray eyes studied them before he nodded. Officially, you're under protection. Unofficially, you help us fill the gaps. But we do it by the book. No cowboy moves. Over the next days, Marcus and Shadow formed a rhythm. Dawn meant tracking drills in the snow. Quiet scent lineups in the cell block. Moments where nightmares gave way to the sound of paws on tile waking him before sunrise. Meanwhile, Ethan pinned printed stills from the hard drive on the office wall, each red mark connecting warehouses, airstrips, safe houses, until the whole state looked like a crooked triangle with red pine at its heart. Then came the night someone tried to silence Marcus. A suppressed shot splintered his apartment doorframe just as Shadow lunged, barking with primal ferocity. Marcus dove for cover, returning fire down the hall. By the time officers arrived, the shooter had fled, leaving only a casing and boot prints in the snow. Ethan showed Marcus a fresh lead. Marion Carter had sent a list of numbers Ryan had hidden in his Bible, one of which tied back to a shipping company long rumored to be a Crane front. Across town, Clint Raleigh, the hired gun, sat on a motel bed cleaning his suppressor, while Laura Pierce, Crane's sharp-eyed logistics broker, lit a cigarette and hissed, "You blew it." Clint said nothing but, "The dog wasn't supposed to be there." The bureau moved quickly. A trap was laid at an abandoned hunting preserve near the airstrip. At dawn, Ethan, Marcus, and Shadow joined Ellison and a tactical team in the snow. Shadow, fitted with a GPS harness, ranged ahead, leading them through the trees. He skirted frozen pits and old snares, guiding them to a sagging cabin filled with crates marked with Crane's shipping company logo. But before they could move in, snowmobiles roared. Gunfire cracked. Agents fanned out, returning fire, driving the attackers toward the clearing. Shadow bolted into the fray, knocking one gunman off balance long enough for Carla Mendoza, the K9 handler, to take him down. Over the next days, Marcus and Shadow formed a rhythm. Dawn meant tracking drills in the snow. Quiet scent lineups in the cell block. Moments where nightmares gave way to the sound of paws on tile waking him before sunrise. Meanwhile, Ethan pinned printed stills from the hard drive on the office wall, each red mark connecting warehouses, airstrips, safe houses, until the whole state looked like a crooked triangle with red pine at its heart. Then came the night someone tried to silence Marcus. A suppressed shot splintered his apartment doorframe just as Shadow lunged, barking with primal ferocity. Marcus dove for cover, returning fire down the hall. By the time officers arrived, the shooter had fled, leaving only a casing and boot prints in the snow. Ethan showed Marcus a fresh lead. Marion Carter had sent a list of numbers Ryan had hidden in his Bible, one of which tied back to a shipping company long rumored to be a Crane front. Across town, Clint Raleigh, the hired gun, sat on a motel bed cleaning his suppressor, while Laura Pierce, Crane's sharp-eyed logistics broker, lit a cigarette and hissed, "You blew it." Clint said nothing but, "The dog wasn't supposed to be there." The Bureau moved quickly. A trap was laid at an abandoned hunting preserve near the airstrip. At dawn, Ethan, Marcus, and Shadow joined Ellison and a tactical team in the snow. Shadow, fitted with a GPS harness, ranged ahead, leading them through the trees. He skirted frozen pits and old snares, guiding them to a sagging cabin filled with crates marked with Crane's Shipping Company logo. But before they could move in, snowmobiles roared. Gunfire cracked. Agents fanned out, returning fire, driving the attackers toward the clearing. Shadow bolted into the fray, knocking one gunman off balance long enough for Carla Mendoza, the K-9 handler, to take him down. When the fight was over, they had crates of evidence and one prisoner. But Marcus still felt Ryan's ghost at his shoulder, urging him forward. The real confrontation came 2 nights later at Red Pine Regional Airport. Crane and his lieutenants were preparing to escape with crates and human lives in tow. Shadow caught the sound of a muffled cry from inside the hangar. Ethan gave the nod. The team breached. Flashbangs went off, light and sound shattering the air. Crane's men fired. Agents pushed in. Marcus tackled Brent Kiley. Ethan scooped up the evidence case, and Carla's K-9 team intercepted Soren Dale. Shadow leapt for Crane, teeth clamping on his coat just as he reached for a black valise. The case skidded across the floor, spilling memory cards and coded ledgers, everything they needed. Crane tried to pull a knife before Ellison leveled his weapon and froze him in place. Steel cuffs clicked shut. The victims were led out into the snow, wrapped in silver emergency blankets, their breath steaming in the floodlights. Marcus stood in the hangar, chest heaving, Shadow at his side. "We got him," he breathed. Ethan held up the recovered evidence. "And everything he's been hiding." 2 weeks later, the courthouse denied Crane bail. Judge Grayson thanked them for saving lives. Outside, Marion Carter stood with a folded American flag, her grief softened into quiet pride. At Evergreen Cemetery, snow fell like a blessing as Marcus knelt by Ryan's grave, resting a hand on the cold stone. "We finished it for you," he whispered. Ethan stood beside him in silence, Shadow sitting at the headstone, tail curled around his paws as if standing guard. The town was quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not the silence of fear, but the kind that comes after a storm has passed. The line had been drawn. Justice had begun. And for the first time since the fire, Marcus felt like he could breathe. Shadow glanced up at him, amber eyes steady, as if to remind him that the fight wasn't over, but they were no longer alone.